Audi, Porsche, BMW, Ferrari. For generations, these European auto greats have been synonymous with elegance, power, exclusivity, and utmost luxury. The European car industry has been a leading force in the auto world for years now. From the reliable and sturdy cars of Volkswagen and Stellantis to shiny premium brands like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Ferrari, the continent has produced some of the world's most legendary brands. But today, most of them are struggling. Declining demand, rising costs, and intensifying competition from electric vehicle makers, especially from China, have hit them hard. Just this week, the effects of this struggle became public for at least two firms. First, German automotive giant Volkswagen saw a massive workers' strike in its home country. It was after the firm said it wanted to cut expenses of up to $11 billion by shutting down a German plant and laying off thousands of workers. Further, the remaining employees may face up to 10% pay cuts.
We hope to be able to achieve what we expect. We are fighting for it, and that's why we are here.
I believe we must fight for what we deserve. It's unacceptable that it's always us. Already at the time, we accepted wage cuts, and now it's back to zero.
Meanwhile, at rival Stellantis, the boardroom battle came out after CEO Carlos Tavares resigned. Tavares had faced criticism following a warning about the automaker's earnings earlier this year. Stellantis is experiencing sluggish sales in North America. The share prices of the firm have dropped by over 40% this year. These are just a couple of examples of what is affecting the European auto industry. Over the past 11 months of 2024, we've seen European automakers announce thousands of layoffs, plant closures, and dire warnings. Let's explore what has hit the old guard of the auto market. First, let's start with the latest earnings reports. For the third quarter of 2024, Volkswagen Group saw its global car deliveries decline by 7%. The German automaker's profit fell by 42% to $3.1 billion. Another German automaker, BMW, says its third quarter profit dropped by 61%. Rival Mercedes-Benz also saw its net income halved between July and September this year. The Netherlands-based Stellantis also saw its net revenue decline by 27%. France's Renault Group reported a modest rise in revenue during the quarter. However, its car deliveries dropped by 5.6%. Most of these automakers said that the reasons behind their sluggish performance were slowing demand, especially in key markets like China and North America. Further, in the European market itself, new car demand has been weak. According to data from the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, in August and September, new car sales registrations saw sharp declines of over 18% and 6% respectively. In October, it slightly rebounded, rising just over 1%. Although nations like France and Italy still saw about a 10% registration decline in October. Adding to the woes, low-cost Chinese cars have turned the European market into a battlefield. A fierce price war in the electric vehicle segment has exacerbated the woes of European manufacturers, whose offerings struggle to compete on cost and technology. Analysts say Chinese EV firms like BYD and NIO are gaining market share in Europe. Another concerning issue for automakers has been the trade tensions between China, Europe, and the United States. Earlier this year, the EU announced it would levy extra tariffs on the import of Chinese electric cars. This was done to limit the sales of cheap Chinese cars in the region and help domestic producers. However, it may hurt many European firms that produce cars in China either through a joint venture or via contract manufacturers.
There's really no winners in this clash, right? But if we talked about who loses more, I'd say it's actually these European automakers, specifically the Germans and the premium ones, because they are producing in China and exporting some of those models, as you mentioned, back to Europe, while at the same time they're facing a downturn in market share in China. So it's almost like a double-edged sword or a double whammy.
When the tariff came into effect, European carmakers opposed it. The outgoing CEO of Stellantis, Carlos Tavares, at the time said that the tariffs would be counterproductive. Meanwhile, Volkswagen CFO argued that it's more important to maintain free and open markets. He said that under a tariff regime, an industry only loses time. Analysts say this tariff war is just starting. As tariff-loving former US President Donald Trump is set to return to the White House, he has promised to impose a blanket tariff of 10% on all imports into the United States. This has raised alarms across the globe, and experts believe Europe may be the hardest hit.
Europe and the UK have got some very hard decisions to make very quickly about China, particularly how they want to keep trading with China. And they may find themselves in a very different position from the US if Trump goes ahead with what he has said consistently he wants to do, which is put big tariffs on trade with China. Europe is split between those like Germany that say, let in all these cheap electric vehicles and solar panels. We need them and we need the trade with China. And those like France who say, no way, let's have a very high barrier to that.
This as fossil fuel-era European carmakers are caught in a costly transition to electric cars. Developing competitive EVs and retrofitting production lines has drained their resources. Many have announced plans to launch EV versions of their famous car models, but they are struggling to deliver. Like Stellantis, which recently postponed the release of its electric version of the Ram pickup truck until 2025. Volkswagen is reportedly also facing similar delays. All this is in the backdrop of a deadline to phase out petrol engines. The European Union plans to ban the sale of new combustion engine vehicles by the end of 2035. It's part of the bloc's agenda to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. However, it has faced pushback from industry leaders like BMW CEO Oliver Zipse. He warned of severe impacts if the ban proceeds as planned. Meanwhile, the IMF projects the EV transition could reduce Europe's GDP by as much as 0.3%. All this while, new Chinese EV firms further penetrate the European market. So the question for the old guard of Europe's car industry is, will they be able to cross the obstacles of weak earnings and demand, or will new, cheaper Chinese alternatives take their place?